Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. And I've had my strong cup of coffee in the morning, so I don't know, it seems to make me cough. I'd like to look at really the big talking point around the Western world today in political circles and elsewhere, which is the what to do about the out of control, hysterical, super destructive mass migration that's being inflicted on white people of the West without their consent, without their agreement, and without consultation. So if white people have been asked let's bring in lots of third world peasants, nobody would have voted for it. So it is being imposed on us without our consent. And the idea of a democracy, it's government, or whether you call it a Republican democracy or whatever, but the idea of a democracy is the consent of the governed must be gained. and this is the elites have not only not asked for approval for this, but they've willfully bypassed it and are acting in open defiance of it. Now the word's out around the world, every third world peasant who knows an NGO activist hustler is wanting to come to the West for, free stuff, gimme free stuff, and coming over in vast numbers. What was I mentioned a number of times before, pretty much 900 plus million Indians, all they've ever dreamed of as from being little children is coming to a white Western country. That's all they wanted to do. And that's the prize. That's the one cherished goal in their life, to get to the West, the rich white West. So let's have a look at, do they want to stay in India and make that a rich country? No, fuck that. I'm just going to go to where all the money is, and take it all from those white Westerners. But I want to go. I saw excuse me again. I saw a government report about a few years ago now, maybe 3 years ago, that dissected and analysed the quality of migrants coming to Australia. Now, this report's been quietly buried and hidden in the back room somewhere, but it was a surprisingly frank and accurate and rather courageous given the political circumstances, but looking at mass migration, saying, well, how many migrants integrated over what time frame, and who are the migrants that are assimilating the best. So this is what I really wanted to focus on in this essay, is looking at, well, what markers exist, what signs are there, what credentials are there, if you want to use that term, to say, well, this person's more likely to assimilate and integrate and provide a social surplus, that is, put more tax into the system than benefits they take out of it, and therefore those are the migrants that any nation would want. So let's have a look at that and go through what those markers are, and what it inevitably means is that the bar, certainly to get into Australia, is very low, even though the government tells horrible lies about, we demand that people speak good English and all this sort of stuff. That's bullshit. They've got illiterate peasants from the third world coming over en masse, and they meet none of the requirements that supposedly exist for ensuring skilled migration. This is a myth that Australia focuses on skilled migration, and it's the definitions that count. So we only have skilled migration. Oh yeah, well, what classifies as a skilled migrant? An illiterate peasant that washes dishes in a restaurant, that's now a skilled migrant. Well, hold on, that's not a skilled migrant, but we say it is. That's our definition. So playing around with the definitions is how they get around. So the headline is skilled migration, but that's bullshit. It's not what happens. So let's have a look. So this report said, well, people from first world countries assimilate much more quickly than do illiterate peasants from third world countries. Now, you don't need to be a genius to sort of work that one out. That's a statement of the obvious. But the globalists want to move surplus populations into the West. They don't want to move other white populations around. That they've got no interest in that at all. Now, some do move, by the way. There are people that do move around, but not in vast numbers, and it's much harder for a German engineer to move to Australia that speaks good English, a German engineer to move to Australia than it is an illiterate peasant from India. It's much easier for the Indian person. The only reason is that's a surplus population area, or Pakistan or something, that's a surplus population area, and the person is non-white. And this is what the globalists, of course, are deceitfully and I would argue treacherously concentrating on. And given they have such control over all the Western governments, they're able to impose this migration scam on the rest of us. But when they do that, it means that these people aren't a positive contribution to the economy and don't integrate or assimilate. And that's a problem. Now, you can kick the can down the road on that one, but it's a problem nonetheless. Now, you can even go back to ancient Egypt, where the Egyptians, because they had huge public works projects like building pyramids, and they had to get a lot of stonemasons and artisans and all sorts of people from around that part of the world. And they weren't all slaves, far from it. A lot of them were, paid professionals. And if they brought in too many stonemasons from this or that area, or region of the Middle East there, they would say, well, these people don't integrate, they don't assimilate, they form ghettos. And so even going back 5,000 years, this was an issue that governments, in this case Egypt, faced. So let's just have a look at this. So first world people coming to Australia, first world people going to other first world countries, assimilate rather quickly. And, for the majority of those first world, particularly if it's skills-based, but for the majority of those first world people, English has been an elective, if not a compulsory subject in school for years. The people have had, if they're college educated, they've had at least 15 years in the education system. Primary school, high school, college, and that sort of thing. So people that speak English, they've got urban lifestyle, they've had paid employment, they've got the certifications and the qualifications. And if they don't, and many of these people, if they know they want to migrate to Australia or an English-speaking country, so they come from, I don't know, France or Germany or something, they'll make a point of either learning English if they don't already have it, or they'll only speak English in the house for the 12 months before they leave in order to sharpen up their English skills. So they're making a very conscious commitment. This is where we want to go. This is where we want to live. This is where we want to make our life. And we want our children to become, good Australians. We want them to marry, choose partners from the local population, integrate, assimilate, and so on. So we want to contribute to the society. We want to get jobs straight away. We want to pay our taxes. We want to volunteer for community organisations. We want to do all of those things. So that's but then you get the third world peasant who maybe has had 2 years schooling at best 2 years schooling, has never had a paid job, has never lived in a city, has no skills, day-to-day needed skills like driving or operating basic machinery, such as even kitchen appliances, those sorts of things, and that's a whole different ballpark. Now the unskilled illiterate peasant from the third world, where the surplus populations are, is outnumbering the skilled migrant by it's got to be 20 to 1. So for every one skilled migrant Australia gets, it gets 20 illiterate peasants. And this is hardly a workable situation. And this is the same, by the way, all over the Western world, whether it's the United States or Britain or elsewhere. So let's go through the markers that make a successful or an integrational, so someone who integrates and assimilates into the local society. Now there are some outliers, and I'll mention those just so that it gives some balance here. But if let's suppose it's not a first world migrant, because they're into most of the first world countries are either Christian or they're white and Christian, or the people aren't not religious in any way, and they're they integrate sort of fairly quickly. So usually straight. I mean, a lot of these people, especially the first world ones, they pretty much walk straight off the plane or the boat or whatever and walk straight into a job. So they become sort of a net gain, if you like, from within days of arriving in the country. So now it's not the case in every single instance, but that's I was talking to a guy who was he was an engineer, aeronautical engineer or something, and he had to work all sorts of different jobs. It took him over 2 years to get a job in that aeronautical engineering space, because there was a sudden reduction in demand, and given the very tight nature of his skills, they weren't necessarily transferable much outside of aeronautical engineering. So he was kind of stuck in that and did want to do that, but it took him a while waiting. So it doesn't happen every time, but the likelihood that it'll happen, someone will walk off the plane and walk straight into a job, or is very, very high when they're other first world migrants. So let's have a look at the third world then. What makes someone integrate or have an ability to integrate there? Well, there are a few things. Now, if someone's had at least 8 years of schooling, and they don't have to be they don't have to be rocket science, but 8 years of schooling, so the discipline of learning and sitting there and paying attention and so on, that type of thing is actually quite important. So they've lived in a city, they've had, or a large town, they've had paid employment. This is very important. Getting some illiterate peasant that's only lived a subsistence lifestyle on a farm in the middle of nowhere, that's a very low integration possibility there. The last thing you'd want to do is get someone from that situation. So, but if they've been in a city and paid employment, had 8 years of schooling, some sort of certification helps. If they speak the language, say to high school level, English in this case, coming to Australia, that's also a big plus. Now there are sort of wider social issues, like do they just want to come to a first world country so they can bring over their whole village and their whole family, including their third cousins and so on? Because they want to do that, if that's the motivation, they're not going to integrate. They will not integrate if that's what they want to do. They have to want to come to this country to start a new life, the West, to start a new life, not to transfer the whole fucking village into a place that's got more money, which is what a lot of them want to do. I just want to go somewhere that's rich so I can bring over my whole village, and then I'll be a big village head man. So, they still live the tribal attitude. So if they're tribal and worship of family, ancestor, descendants, that sort of thing, they're minimal chance they will integrate. And if they do integrate, it'll be over so many generations. The greater likelihood is that they'll change the host country rather than they will change it for the host country. So particularly when large numbers come over. So also the arranged marriages and brides and husbands from the home country, that these people won't integrate. That will take them 100 years, more than 100 years, 200 years to integrate, as shown, by the way, with the Indians, subcontinent Indians in places like Fiji and so on. They've been there for 160 years in Fiji, and the integration rate is like 1 or 2% after 160 years. So I'll give you an idea as to just how tribal these people will be and are, even when they're in a first world country like Australia. There are whole suburbs in Australia where the Indians, you can't go. It's 99% Indian, and why is that? Why must they live in ghettos? Pretty much all of them, even the ones that you'd think would reasonably well integrate, all of them seem to have arranged marriages and send back to the home country for husbands and brides. And any child that is wayward and wants to even marry an Indian that was born in Australia, even that will receive, they'll come under severe family pressure, threats of excommunication if they don't. So these people don't integrate, in other words. So So tribal worship, ancestor worship, arranged marriages. These are markers that will, that should be massive red flashing lights saying these people will not integrate. And any group that doesn't integrate in a single generation, two at absolute maximum, you have to ask, well, why not? Now, there are a few exceptions. There's an Italian guy. He was a concreter, and he came out to Australia, I think, in 1970. And his English is still, it's almost kindergarten level. I speak some Spanish, so I kind of was able to work around it to some extent. But just talking to him, given the Latin base, I mean, of Spanish and Italian. So just talking to him. He came to Australia as a concreter, which was a needed skill at the time. So he had minimal schooling. So he left school at 12 years old, I think, in Italy. And he came from the rural areas of southern Italy, which again, he didn't have any urban living, and so he kind of worked for the local mafia family, and he was paid in barter. So he was given food and services and things like that rather than money, which again is something that should have had a red flashing light. So, hey, this guy is not going to integrate too well. So he only understood employment and work and reward within a mafia type context. And so in southern Italy. So when he came to Australia, he got a job with an Italian concreting company. And which is fine. I mean, that was his skill base, and he was 19, I think. And so he worked for them until he retired. This concreting company. So he made he made a decent living for himself and bought a quite modest house and had 3 children and so on. Now the children. All married, locally born Italian people in Australia. So, but at least it was locally born. My guess would be, and I met one of them. My guess would be their children will integrate, and they've kind of half integrated, but they still speak Italian in the house. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it just slows down the integration. It puts limits on the integration there. So he even after being in Australia for 50 years or getting on for 50 years, he still barely speaks English. But he only ever worked in this Italian company. They all spoke Italian at the work, and again in this mafia style, if he needed anything, whether it be Italian food delicacies, I don't know, the cannelloni or something. Yeah, he was. There was always Italian shops or places he could go to that were owned by Italians, and so he kept it in the community, which again prevents integration, assimilation. So, but he was a positive to the. He got employment straight away, and because a lot of the stuff he got was paid under the table, then I'd have a query with the taxation issues and things like that there. But nonetheless, he got a job straight away and he worked his whole life. So that's not a bad thing. And in a semi-skilled job, which he must have been okay at to do it for that long. He wanted to keep on working, but he had a heart attack and he had to stop. So anyway, there's a productive guy, but he doesn't want to assimilate. He's happy to work and he's happy to be productive, but he doesn't want to assimilate. As he points out, well, why should I have to learn English? Apart from the fact it's difficult to learn, everyone that I interacted with spoke Italian, so why did I need to? But coming back to the market, going back to these markets as to what's going to determine a successful or most likely successful assimilation integration, this needs to be front and center of any immigration debate. That people that aren't integrating or don't assimilate, you can pretty much pick it with a very high degree of accuracy from the moment they fill out their application form for come to Australia or a Western first world country. Now, just on the people that I know, that I'm aware of, that are migrants, very few of them will integrate. Some will, but very few of them will integrate if they don't come from a first world country. So straight away, you're not from first world country, your integration rate's going to be, at best 50%. And if you haven't had at least 8 years of schooling, if you haven't lived in a city, if you haven't had paid employment, if you, and so on and so forth, then your chances of integrating are less and less. If you have tribal and family ancestor worship, or if you have if you're devout, if you're religiously devout with a non-Christian religion, that will, your integration rate will plummet as well. So just by looking at those, and you can say, well, that's racist by saying these things, you're Hitler and this, but the reality is, if integration assimilation is given any priority at all, which it should and must do, then those markers are critical and essential. And by ignoring them in the interests of some sort of twisted insanity around diversity and this sort of thing, by ignoring them, all that happens is there becomes a greater number of people who have no intention of assimilating at all. And you even get the grandchildren of Islamic migrants, for example, that are out on the streets placard waving about Gaza. And they're the second generation Australian born. Fuck. You even get that in the case of, say, the Italian case that I mentioned, even the Greeks, in the communist uprising in Greece, there was quite a few Greeks left to Greece and came to places like Australia and or the US and so on. And a lot of those were the rural peasants. And in Greece, who were illiterate in their own language, and they've been very slow to assimilate. Even again, the grandchildren of those, but they will only marry other Greeks, and they will still speak Greek at home, even though they're the second generation Australian born. They will still treat Greek issues, as in Greek politics, as being, they get the Greek newspaper, and they still treat Greek politics as being their primary concern, not what's going on in Australia. And again, second generation born. So these markers are I think absolutely critical. If there's still plenty of people in if you look at, say, the people coming from India that have got internationally recognised tertiary qualifications, they've lived in a city, they've had paid employment, they've had a lot of things, and you say, well, they tick all the boxes. Look at that. They speak English. I mean, they're going to work, but they don't, because they're still tribal, even though they may, and they're still sort of class based, as in the caste, the Brahmin caste and all that sort of stuff. They're still caught up in all that. They're still tribal. There's still arranged marriages. They still want to bring their relatives out, this sort of thing. So they don't integrate. So they still want to live next door to other Indians. They don't want to live next door to white people. And they still believe themselves to be culturally and spiritually superior to white people. So you put all those things together, and they're not going to integrate. And again, looking at the Indians in Fiji, not that they're all Brahmins, by the way, in Fiji, but if you look at their integration in there, again, it's 1 or 2% after 160 fucking years. So you look at the Chinese, many, not all, but many of the Chinese that came out in the gold rush era in the 1850s in Australia. Even today, they still speak with a very much a clipped accent. 170 years later, they still speak with a clipped accent. They only marry other Chinese. They only do business with other Chinese. When it comes to them spending money, they'll take money from the white people. They don't want to spend it on the white. And so even there, the integration rate is it's better than it is with the Indians, but it's still, even after 170 years, it's still pretty ordinary. So the integration rates of these people is quite low. And those markers that suggest or indicate, or strongly indicate, very low integration and assimilation rates. These must be taken into account. Not because somebody wants to be racist or not inclusive. That's irrelevant. That's just leftist globalist fucking shame and blame bullshit. The issue is, will this person or these people, it could be a family, will these people integrate? How long will it take to integrate? How long before they're generating a social surplus? That is, they're paying more into the system than they're taking out. And how long will that take? And that should be the only question or questions. And as soon as you go outside of that, it becomes absurdly ideological, which means we're going to end up with, already have, situations like we see in the United Kingdom, where there are millions of people roaming the streets, where they think the issues in Gaza are more important than anything else. It's insane. You've been with Tassus today, excuse me, at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.